Become a patron at www.patreon.com/Golden Era Bookworm for hard to find books, scans of rare photos, and articles on the golden era of bodybuilding. Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookworm here. I'd like to continue today with the Ancient Physical Culture series, and in previous videos I have presented interviews with Professor Conor Heffernan of the Starck Center in Austin, Texas, USA, where we have discussed the origins of physical culture and physical culture practices, for example, in China. Today we discuss the physical culture of ancient India and how they have impacted modern practices. We discuss Indian club swinging, wrestling, Gama the Great, as well as the traditional practice of Kalari Payat, which is an ancient form of traditional Indian martial arts, as well as yoga. This interview is an awesome one, and I do hope you enjoy it. Now into one could either branch out into Egypt or India, because you've mentioned the practice, for example, of club swinging, and I guess it would be much safer to swing a club in practice than a mace or a guando. So would you say that is an angle as to how the Indian club could have been developed?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And it's interesting. Joseph Alter is an anthropologist who's written a lot on Indian club swing and Indian wrestling as well. And he's, to me anyway, like opened my eyes to the variety of meanings, but also practices when it comes to Indian club swing. So you'll get the traditional, smooth, very heavy Indian club that's swung around the body, which is very safe, which is, that's fine.
Yeah.
But they also kind of kick it up a notch. So you'll see on YouTube these incredible club swinging practices where it'll be the long, heavy Indian club, and there'll be nails all around the club. And the idea is you must swing, these clubs around your body without actually touching your body. So it's kind of kicking it up a notch. It's on YouTube. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen, just the strength and skill involved in it. But returning to Alter, it's tying into kind of the martial aspect. She's talking about this is training troops, but it's also, you said, building the prana, building that life force through physical activity. And when you see a club swinger, like a very adept club swinger, you can see there is like a rhythm there, and there is something internal very clearly going on, which is a really fascinating aspect that I think tends to be lost sometimes now in modern exercise practices and physical culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to agree with you there. I can't say I've looked much into club swinging practice, all these fascinating videos you've talked about, but now I've got a real
really
thirst.
Yeah, it's a complete it's like nothing else you'll see in the fitness industry or in the practice of any sort of exercise, and it's still going on today, which is incredible.
It really took a resurgence recently, didn't it?
Yes, it really has, which has worked out well for me. I became interested in it 5 years ago, and I went from, actually I can show you them now.
Great.
I had my old, very light Victorian clubs, but because club swing has gotten so popular, I managed to purchase from an Indian maker of these clubs, very large and heavy clubs. So I'm working my way up from these ones to slightly, more impressive.
Fantastic.
But yeah, it has taken on it's interesting that it's really taken on a great popularity in the last few years, and you have people like On It selling their own Indian clubs, or people are selling, mass producers are now selling some form of clubs, which is kind of good for my eyes because we're going back to tried and tested practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's brilliant. I didn't know you were into Indian club swinging. That's great.
Yeah, all the weird and wonderful. That's usually where I can be found.
That's fantastic. Speaking of Indian club swinging, what role do you think Persia or the Persian arts had to do with influencing, if they influenced, or was it vice versa? Because I know that it also exists there.
Yeah, that's right. And it's something I still haven't quite figured out what's going on, because we have ancient Indian texts talking about gadas, which are kind of clubs, more maces, but some people still use the term.
Yes, gadas, correct. From about 400 BC, even up to that old, I think.
Yes, yeah, no, that's right. So there is some form of club in the Indian, psyche and the Indian consciousness. I haven't looked as much at Persia, but obviously there is a great intermingling between the two societies. So it's one of those things that I'd love to know more about, but I haven't dug into the Persian context as much. But it is interesting when looking at the differences nowadays between the two practices. They're both using heavy clubs, but the way they swing them, how they swing them, differs slightly. So it's probably one of those, mutually influencing each other, but also kind of having their own cultural spin-offs or differences with them.
Yeah, I mean, Persia is something else I'd like to talk about as well, but I want to stick with India for now. But I just wanted to know your ideas behind the influences, and I do believe that there is some. I mean, I've been to India myself, and having seen, especially in North, the Mughal influence makes me definitely agree with what you just said. I mean, there was a cultural exchange going on for many centuries. And I'm not surprised if they learnt and exchanged ideas millennia ago. So.
Oh no, absolutely. And we know that some of the Mughal leaders would keep almost like a retinue of club swingers, like of Indian club swingers, because it was an impressive thing to have at your court. Yeah. So they're very, very aware, and they admired the practice, and vice versa. So I doubt the two kind of emerged independently of each other.
Yeah. You've talked about the Gada being the precursor to the Indian club. Could you describe it? Because I've never actually seen a picture of it or anything. Do you know if there's any even pictures of the Gada, or is it just described in the texts?
It's hard to know. I haven't done as much research into the early origins of it. I know nowadays if you type into Google Gama the Great, who's this wonderful Indian wrestler from the late 19th, early 20th century, there's often photos of him with the club kind of over one shoulder. And the Gada, this is a handy prop. So it's almost kind of slender up to here. Then there's a ball here and a pointy top, a spike at the end of it.
Right.
So it's more of a religious style club, but I know some people draw parallels between these early Gadas and then the large Indian clubs that you see. But I think the best illustration of it, that's also related to physical culture, is looking up photos of Gama the Great from the kind of late 19th, early 20th century, because he's photographed with a Gada over one arm.
So he used the Gada.
It's likely he was definitely photographed with it. And I think he was presented ceremonial Gadas because he was such a wonderful wrestler and such a wonderful club swinger that people said, here's our present to you. So he's intimately linked with the Gada.
So he was awarded the Gada.
Yes, so he was given a silver Gada in the maybe it was in the 1920s. Whoever gave it to him is escaping me, but I know he was given at one point a very impressive and expensive ceremonial Gada, in much the same way that kind of British and American physical cultures would have been given a belt or a medal, in recognition of their strength or their athleticism.
Yeah. Brilliant. I didn't know that. That's fantastic. I mean, I remember encountering an article in Your Physique magazine during the mid-1940s on Gama the Great. And back then, and this was years ago, through my ignorance, I skipped the article, which now I regret. But later I've read that Gama the Great used to do something like 10,000 these kind of Hindu push-ups and thousands of dans, which are the Hindu squats, every single day to build his 50+ inch chest. It's incredible, like reading this stuff. So do you know much about Gama the Great? Because I really need to get back to that article.
Just little snippets here and there. He, as you say, he had this incredible regimen. So the traditional Hindu wrestling exercises are things like club swing, nal lifting, stone lifting, and then the bitaks and dans, the push-ups and squats. And we know Gama did all of those exercises, far and above what anyone else seemed to do, any of his contemporaries. There's a wonderful story about him I think he's a young teenager, and there's a competition in his town to see who can do the most Hindu squats. And so there's 13 to 14-year-old Gama and then grown men. And Gama outlasts all of them because he's this, one child who just refuses to give up and will keep going through the pain of doing them over and over. Now, while that might be a fabricated story from the 1920s and 30s when I read it, it was still illustrative of the fact that he did thousands of push-ups, thousands of Hindu squats every day. He had an incredible appetite for food, and he really was like the great. He travels from India to Great Britain. He faces off against anyone and everyone who will wrestle against him. He has some difficulties in learning the British style of wrestling because obviously how they wrestled in India was different to how they wrestled in a kind of competition style in Britain. And he still beat the majority of people that he faced off against, which is incredible if you think he learned a different style of wrestling kind of on the fly or as he goes.
Yeah.
And he's this incredible ambassador for India, but he's also an incredible ambassador for Indian physical culture because here's someone coming to Britain who hasn't, lifted weights in a traditional British sense. He hasn't been lifting dumbbells, hasn't been lifting barbells, hasn't been doing kind of British style gymnastics. He has built this amazing physique. Like, you look at him now, he's still a very broad and impressive looking individual. And he builds that body through a Hindu diet and Hindu exercises. So he's not only an Indian ambassador, but he's an ambassador for Indian physical culture.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. That's brilliant. This is brilliant. Fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, you've touched on his forms of training. And this goes back again to what I've also read about the Indian physical culture. They actually incorporated this kind of athletic or military training as well as wrestling for their soldiers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So Indian physical culture is intimately related to Indian warfare, like Indian military training, and then a form of Hindu spiritualism. So when you're exercising, you're building this life force, you're getting into kind of a one consciousness or a one conscious flow in your exercises, but it stems from the military and kind of branches out into wrestling and into the leisure sphere. So I think Rosalind O'Hanlon is her name. It's certainly O'Hanlon is her surname. Has a wonderful article on medieval Indian physical culture and how it kind of begins in the military as a way of training soldiers for battle, and then it kind of branches off into its own distinct form. And that's really what you're finding across cultures is it's mainly warfare and sport, and then it goes into maybe physical culture.
Yeah. Speaking on that, again, going through my own martial arts background, how I studied, I've studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which comes originally from Japan. And it's thought that in Asia, there was a big influence from Indian martial arts at the very beginning. And we're talking millennia. Yes. So we're talking about the Shaolin Temple in that apparently I've gone to the Shaolin Temple and I've also learned this from my masters, again, word of mouth, that there was a Indian monk, and I don't know whether he was a warrior, but he was definitely a monk, a trained physical culturist, right, called Damo or Bodhidharma. And he had learned a military style of, and I'll say a physical culture art, because this style called Kalari Payat had both a religious significance. It built the physique, but it also had a very strong military significance in that it was used to train soldiers. The original format can still be found. It is thousands of years old, and it is thought to have stemmed into power yoga or vinyasa yoga, which people call it now, power yoga nowadays, Shaolin martial arts, and even Japanese martial arts. And it's so interesting because they start off basically in the first, I believe, 5 years of practice. They start only doing a kind of vinyasa yoga practice, and they must do it for 5 years. It's literally like a ritual. You wake up every morning and you do it. And after that, you learn Ayurvedic style medicine and treatments to strengthen your physical culture. You basically cultivate your physique during those 5 years in preparation for the martial aspect to come up on top of that. And after that, you start training with, again, clubs, weapons like a sword and a shield. And you can actually see aspects of that in Shaolin Kung Fu nowadays. And of course in weapons trainings in many different martial arts, but you can also see the original foundation in Vinyasa Yoga. It's mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, it's an incredible mixing of systems, isn't it? Like that's really remarkable.
I don't know if you've ever learnt about Kalari Payat. It's literally the oldest martial arts from India, at least that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Do you know how old it is, or?
It's thousands of years
Like,
old, and
as old as the rocks.
Basically, and I know that Shaolin Kung Fu, which is a very old style of martial art, stems from Kalari Payat because of this Indian monk that traveled over to China and found monks that were in poor physical condition, and so he taught them. There's even a mountain. So Shaolin is actually at a mountain. The Shaolin Temple is actually on a mountain, or at the base of a mountain. And if you climb the mountain, on top of that temple, there is the cave of Damo, with a shrine dedicated to him. And it's interesting because he's an Indian monk, being revered in China. It's just so bizarre, right? So, yeah.
And when you're doing the training, are they telling you the story and history all along, or is this something you think, okay, that's amazing, isn't it? Just that it's so deeply embedded in the actual, like you can't do the practice without knowing who it came from, and what they have done.
So we've talked about, we've talked so much about India, China, and I'm assuming that with India, the religious texts that you're referring to are the Mahabharata. Is that correct?
Yes, sorry, that's correct.
Yes.
The name completely escaped me, so thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that the hero in the Mahabharata has almost a parallel to the story of Hercules, in that he's also seen like a godlike strength hero, right? Has there ever been analysis of both texts to see if there are further similarities? I just find that really interesting.
That would be fascinating. It's one of those things I'm sure someone has looked at. This idea of the strong, godlike character who's been put through a series of tests, physical tests. That'd be fun. I'm sure there is. I can't think of any to hand, but it does seem to be a common motif in different cultures when talking about the mythology, that there is like a godlike deity with incredible strength, incredible fighting prowess, who needs to undergo a series of challenges. Either win the day, win the girl, defeat the enemy, or become closer to God, to the Godhead. Yeah,
it's interesting. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the ancient physical culture practices, such as the light dumbbell system or other strongman practices, please visit my website www.goldenerabookworm.com, where you'll find many books and courses describing the physical culture methods of the strongmen of the past, all available on my website www.goldenerabookworm.com. So I do hope you've enjoyed watching this interview with Professor Conor Heffernan of the Starck Center in Austin, Texas, and our discussion of the physical culture practices of ancient India. Indeed, the early practices of Indian wrestling, club swinging, yoga, and Kalari Payat have not only impacted physical culture today, but have stood the test of time, especially with a recent boom in both yoga and club swinging as modern practices, which has much to say about these ancient but very effective practices. If you've enjoyed watching the video, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, if you wish to support my work, just donate via PayPal, become a patron, visit my website for out-of-print books and courses on old school bodybuilding, and get in touch if you want to collaborate or pass on your bodybuilding relics. That's it for me. Hope you enjoyed the video. This is the Golden Era Bookworm. Bye for now. To take full advantage of my collaboration with Old School Labs, please visit their website and choose from their marvelous range of supplements using my code BOOKWORM12. And for an entertaining look at the history of bodybuilding's supplement industry, I would highly recommend watching Subs the Movie, which I have collaborated in, available at Amazon Prime and Vimeo.